The Manhattan skyline glittered like a crown of glass and gold when Emily Morgan leaned against the penthouse balcony, one hand resting gently on her small belly. Her husband, Richard Harrington, the real estate billionaire, had just walked in, wearing his navy Tom Ford suit and the smug smile of a man who owned everything he could see. "You did it, Em," he said, handing her a small velvet box. Inside was a silver Mont Blanc pen engraved with her initials. "For the future CEO of the startup you built from nothing." Emily laughed softly. She loved how he made her feel like she mattered, even in his high-powered world. Tonight, they celebrated not just her promotion, but the life growing inside her. She whispered, "We're having a baby, Richard. Can you believe it?" He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his Rolex glinting under the city lights. "Everything I do for this family," he murmured. But even as he said it, his phone vibrated on the marble counter. A name flashed across the screen, Sophia Reyes. Emily saw it for a split second before Richard quickly flipped the phone over. "Just work," he said casually, kissing her cheek. She believed him, though something inside her chest tightened. Later that night, as she sat by the window sipping decaf from her Tiffany cup, Emily opened her laptop to finish a proposal. On the screensaver, she saw their wedding photo, his hand on her waist, her eyes full of trust. She didn't notice the reflection behind her. Richard typing quickly on his iPhone, smiling faintly at something he read. When she walked into their bedroom, she caught a faint scent of unfamiliar perfume. Not hers, something floral, expensive, with a trace of guilt. "Were you with someone from the office?" she asked, softly. He turned, his tone smooth as glass. "Stop worrying, Em. You need rest. The doctor said stress is bad for the baby." His calm made her doubt herself. Maybe she was imagining it. Maybe pregnancy hormones were twisting her thoughts. Still, that perfume lingered long after he went to shower. At midnight, she wrote in her private journal, "I trust him. But why does my heart tremble when he smiles?" Weeks later, as fall painted the city in gold, Richard grew busier. Meetings, trips to Los Angeles, endless investor dinners. Emily tried to ignore the unease, focusing instead on prenatal yoga and baby names. Her startup thrived. Everyone called her the Golden Woman of Manhattan. Then one morning, as she prepared for a client pitch at her Park Avenue office, her assistant handed her a glossy magazine. On the cover, Richard Harrington at a charity gala, holding a champagne flute, and beside him, smiling in a silver gown, was Sophia Reyes. The caption read, "Power Couple of the Year." Emily's hand froze. The room spun. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred. Her pulse raced. Her phone rang. It was Richard. "Don't believe everything you read," he said before she could speak. "You know how media twists things." Her voice cracked. "Were you there with her?" Silence. Then, "Emily, you're being dramatic. I'll call you later." The line went dead. She pressed her trembling hands to her belly, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's okay." But deep down, something had shattered a promise, a trust, a world she thought would last forever. Outside her window, Manhattan still glittered, indifferent to her pain. And somewhere across town, laughter echoed from a gala ballroom, where Richard and Sophia raised their glasses under crystal chandeliers. Emily's smile faded into the night, unaware that this was only the beginning of her heartbreak. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Fifth Avenue apartment, painting everything in gold. Emily Morgan stood before the mirror, her hand resting gently on her growing belly. She smiled, feeling the faintest flutter her baby's first kick. The sound of the city below felt softer today, as if New York itself was holding its breath for her. She was hosting a small brunch that day to celebrate the pregnancy with close friends and colleagues. The long dining table was covered with white roses and silver cutlery, the kind of simple elegance she loved. Her father, Robert Morgan, a retired construction tycoon, had flown in from Boston just to see her. He kissed her forehead and said, "You were born to be a mother, Em. Don't let that man's world harden you." She smiled, not realizing how prophetic his words were. The doorbell rang. Emily, in her soft cream dress, walked to the door expecting one of her friends. Instead, a woman stood there tall, stunning, with waves of dark hair and eyes that carried both charm and danger. "Sophia Reyes," she introduced herself with a practiced smile. "Richard invited me. He said it's a celebration for the baby." For a heartbeat, Emily froze. "Of course," she said politely, hiding her shock. Inside, her chest tightened. She had seen that name on Richard's phone more than once. Sophia walked in gracefully, wearing a diamond necklace that shimmered in the morning light. Every movement felt rehearsed. Emily noticed the way she scanned the apartment, the art, the crystal, the little signs of a life built with love. Sophia's eyes lingered on the framed photo of Emily and Richard on their wedding day. She smirked slightly before turning back. "Congratulations, Mrs. Harrington," Sophia said, taking a sip of champagne that wasn't meant for her. "You must be so proud." "I am," Emily replied softly, her voice calm, but her heartbeat loud in her ears. Throughout brunch, Sophia talked endlessly about business, travels, and working with Richard on his new project in Los Angeles. Every word felt like a blade dressed in perfume. Emily smiled through it all, her father's protective eyes watching silently from across the room. When Richard finally arrived late, as usual, he kissed Emily on the cheek, then greeted Sophia with a familiarity that chilled the air. "Didn't expect you two to meet so soon," he said casually. Sophia's lips curved. "Neither did I. But fate has a sense of humor." The conversation at the table turned awkward. Emily tried to steer it toward baby names and nursery designs, but every glance between Richard and Sophia spoke volumes. Her father noticed, his jaw tightening. After the guests left, Robert pulled Emily aside. "That woman, she's dangerous." "I can feel it." Emily sighed, her hands trembling slightly. "She works with him. Dad. I can't make accusations without proof." He placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "You don't need proof to trust your instincts." That night, Emily lay in bed beside Richard, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. His phone buzzed again, another message. She stared at it, her heart pounding. Then she turned away, whispering to herself, "You promised me forever." Outside, the city lights flickered like a warning. Somewhere far below, a car horn echoed through the streets of Manhattan, fading into the hum of the sleepless city. Emily's father stood by the window in the guest room, staring out at the skyline. In his eyes was a storm brewing, the quiet rage of a man who sensed that his daughter's heart was about to be broken. And in another corner of the city, Sophia lifted her glass of wine in a dark hotel suite, whispering into the phone, "She'll never see it coming, Richard." Emily didn't know it yet, but the first shadow over her happiness had just fallen. The first snow of December brushed lightly against the Manhattan skyline when Emily Morgan felt the sudden cramp tear through her stomach. She had been working late at her office on Park Avenue, reviewing a proposal on her MacBook Pro, when the pain hit like lightning. Her vision blurred, her pulse raced. She dropped her coffee cup, clutching her belly as the world tilted around her. Her assistant rushed in, panicked. "Emily, you're pale. I'm calling an ambulance." The sirens screamed through the city streets as the ambulance sped toward Mount Sinai Hospital. Emily's hands trembled as she tried to steady her breathing. "Please," she whispered to the paramedic, "just save my baby." Inside the bright, sterile room, doctors moved quickly. Monitors beeped, IVs dripped, and the air smelled of antiseptic and fear. Dr. Laura Bennett, the obstetrician she trusted most, entered with calm urgency. "Emily, you're experiencing placental complications. We need to keep you here for observation. Any more stress could make it worse." Emily nodded weakly, tears rolling down her face. "Is my baby okay?" "For now," Dr. Bennett said softly. "But you must rest, no work, no emotional distress." When Richard finally arrived 2 hours later, still dressed in his black suit, his face showed irritation more than concern. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" he demanded. "I did," Emily whispered, her voice fragile. "You didn't answer." He glanced at his phone. "I was in a meeting. You know how it is." She looked up at him, searching for any trace of the man she once trusted. "I thought you'd be worried." "I am," he replied, but his tone was flat. His phone buzzed again. He glanced at it. Sophia's name flashed briefly on the screen. He turned it face down. Emily saw it, but she said nothing. Her heart was too tired for confrontation. The next morning, as snow continued to fall outside the hospital window, Emily lay in silence, listening to the faint hum of the city. The baby monitor beeped rhythmically beside her. Her father arrived with a gentle knock, holding a Starbucks coffee in one hand and a small teddy bear in the other. "Morning, sweetheart," Robert said, his voice heavy with concern. "How are you holding up?" Emily smiled weakly. "The doctor says I'll be fine if I stay calm. I just wish Richard would." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Her father set the coffee on the table. "Don't waste your energy on wishing, Em. Focus on healing. You and that little one are all that matter." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want my child to grow up in a broken home." Robert sat beside her, his hand tightening around hers. "Then let's make sure it's not broken. Whatever's happening with that man, we'll face it together." Later that day, while Emily rested, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You deserve better than him." No name, no clue. Just those words. She frowned, unsettled. Moments later, Dr. Bennett entered again. "Emily, I'd like to keep you under close supervision. You're stable, but any more stress could endanger both you and your baby." Emily nodded, holding her stomach protectively. "I'll do whatever it takes." As evening fell, Richard appeared once more, carrying a bouquet of roses. "Thought you'd like these," he said with a forced smile. "They're beautiful," she murmured. "How was your meeting?" "Productive," he replied quickly, avoiding her gaze. When he stepped out to take a call, she could hear his muffled voice through the glass door. "Sophia." "Not now. She's awake." The words stabbed her like ice. Emily closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. The monitor beside her beeped faster, echoing the storm inside her chest. And as the snowstorm grew stronger outside, Emily realized the real danger wasn't just in her body, but in the betrayal slowly killing her spirit. 2 weeks later, the city sparkled beneath the glow of winter lights. The annual Harrington Foundation Gala was being held at the Ritz-Carlton in Midtown Manhattan, a night of elegance, diamonds, and carefully crafted lies. Photographers lined the crimson carpet, flashes bursting like fireworks as black Mercedes and Bentleys pulled up in front of the marble steps. Inside, chandeliers glittered above silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. The air smelled of champagne and ambition. It was the kind of night Richard Harrington lived, for a night where image meant everything. Emily was supposed to be there. Her name was printed on the program beside her husband's, Richard and Emily Harrington, founders and benefactors. But instead of the ballroom, she was lying in a hospital bed, pale and fragile, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor her only music. Richard had told her, "You need to rest, sweetheart. Don't worry about the gala. I'll handle everything." He kissed her forehead before leaving, but his eyes held a flicker of guilt he couldn't hide. Emily watched him walk out the door with a pit in her stomach. Something told her this night would not be about charity. At the Ritz-Carlton, Richard arrived arm in arm with Sophia Reyes. The crowd gasped as the cameras captured them under the golden archway. Sophia wore a breathtaking silver gown that shimmered like liquid light. Her smile was soft, practiced, deadly. Richard, in his black Armani tuxedo, looked every bit the charming billionaire. To everyone there, they seemed the perfect couple. "Mr. Harrington, where's your lovely wife tonight?" a reporter called out. Richard's grin didn't falter. "Emily's not feeling well," he replied smoothly, "but she sends her love and support for the foundation." Sophia leaned in, her voice a whisper meant for the cameras to catch. "We'll make sure the night still shines." Laughter followed. The champagne flowed. The orchestra played Sinatra under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Back at Mount Sinai, Emily stared at her phone, scrolling through the social media updates. Every photo from the gala stabbed deeper. There he was, her husband laughing beside Sophia, their hands brushing, eyes locked. Comment sections overflowed. "They look perfect together. The new power couple. Her chest tightened, pain spreading across her ribs. The nurse rushed in. "Mrs. Harrington, are you all right?" Emily shook her head, unable to speak. "Just turn off the screen." Meanwhile, at the gala, Richard lifted his glass for a toast. "Tonight, we celebrate love, generosity, and the bright future ahead." His words dripped with hypocrisy. Sophia clinked her glass against his, whispering, "To our new beginning." The sound of cameras clicking filled the room. Somewhere in the crowd, Michael Lee, Emily's cousin and a corporate lawyer, watched quietly from a corner table. He had come on behalf of the Morgan family, curious after hearing whispers about Richard's charitable partner. When he saw the way Sophia touched Richard's arm, something in his gut turned cold. He pulled out his iPhone and snapped a discreet photo. Evidence. Later, as Richard and Sophia danced under the golden lights, Michael sent the picture to Robert Morgan with a single message: "You need to see this." At that exact moment, Emily woke up from a restless sleep in her hospital room. She turned her head and saw her father sitting by the window, phone in hand, his face dark with fury. "Dad?" she whispered weakly. Robert looked at her, eyes burning. "He's not at a meeting, Emily. He's with her." Publicly, her world tilted. No. He wouldn't. But he did. Robert rose, his jaw clenched. "Rest, sweetheart. I'll handle this." He walked out into the cold Manhattan night, determination in his stride. And as the music soared at the Ritz-Carlton, the first spark of vengeance began to burn. The next morning, the city was wrapped in a gray mist. The gala headlines flooded every major outlet: billionaire Richard Harrington and PR star Sophia Reyes steal the night. The photos told a story that Emily couldn't bear to look at, but her father and Michael Lee studied every frame with quiet rage. Michael sat in his downtown office overlooking Wall Street, his MacBook Pro open, the morning news replaying on a muted screen. He was a man of logic, not emotion, but this wasn't business anymore. This was blood. Emily had been like a sister to him since childhood. He'd watched her build her career, fall in love, and now watched her be torn apart by the same man she once worshipped. He zoomed in on one of the photos from the Ritz-Carlton. Richard's hand rested lightly on Sophia's waist. Behind them, a screen displayed the Harrington Foundation logo. "He's mixing personal pleasure with charity funds," Michael muttered, taking notes. "That's fraud if I can prove it." He picked up his phone and called Robert Morgan. "Uncle Robert, we need to move carefully. If we expose him without evidence, he'll crush Emily in court." Robert's voice came through rough with anger. "Do whatever it takes, Michael. That man humiliated my daughter while she's fighting to keep his child alive. I won't stand for it." Michael exhaled slowly. "Then we'll fight smart." He started digging. He called a contact at the city registrar's office, another at the finance bureau. Within hours, his screen filled with documents, foundation budgets, donation transfers, property listings. And there it was, a payment from Harrington Properties labeled Consulting, S. Reyes, LLC. $500,000. Michael's pulse quickened. He printed the file, sliding it into a leather folder. "You just handed me your first mistake, Richard." Meanwhile, at Mount Sinai, Emily sat up in bed, pale but determined. She had refused pain medication, needing her mind clear. The nurse had just left when Michael walked in, holding the folder. "Hey, cousin," he said softly. "You look stronger today." She tried to smile. "That's a generous lie." He pulled a chair beside her. "Emily, I need you to see something." Her trembling hands opened the folder. When she saw Richard's signature on the payment authorization, her eyes filled with disbelief. "He paid her?" Michael nodded. "And that's just what's on paper. I think there's more, possibly property transfers, hidden assets. He's preparing to move everything under Sophia's name." Tears welled up, but anger flickered beneath them. "Why would he do that? He told me everything we built was for our family." Michael's voice softened. "Because people like Richard never build families, Emily. They build empires and burn anyone who stands in their way." For a long moment, silence filled the room. The faint hum of machines, the heartbeat monitor, the The distant sound of snow against the window all merged into one heavy rhythm. Then Emily whispered, "What do we do?" Michael leaned forward. "You rest. I'll keep digging. There's a man I know in Richard's finance department, someone who owes me a favor. If he talks, we'll have the proof to destroy Richard's public image." Emily's lip trembled. "I don't want revenge, Michael. I just want the truth." He met her gaze. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Outside the hospital, the snow was falling harder now, blanketing the city in white silence. Michael stepped out into the cold, his coat collar up, phone pressed to his ear. "Get me the full list of Harrington accounts," he told his contact. "Everything tied to Sophia Reyes." As he walked down Fifth Avenue, he passed the glowing Christmas displays in Tiffany's window diamonds, gold, promises that glittered but never lasted. He looked up at the skyline and muttered, "You think you're untouchable, Richard. But you've just met your reckoning." And somewhere in his glass penthouse, Richard Harrington smiled, unaware that his empire had already begun to crack. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady hum of the heart monitor. Outside, the storm that had covered Manhattan in white had turned into cold rain, tapping gently against the window like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Emily Morgan lay awake, her body weak, her spirit even weaker. Days had passed since the gala, and though her physical condition had slightly improved, her soul felt shattered beyond repair. She stared at the ceiling, feeling the IV line tug at her wrist every time she moved. The air smelled of disinfectant and loneliness. Her phone sat on the side table, silent. Not a single message from Richard. Not one call. A soft knock broke the silence. Nurse Kelly, kind and middle-aged, entered with a warm smile. "Morning, sweetheart. How's our little fighter doing today?" Emily tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Still fighting," she whispered. Kelly checked the monitors, adjusted the drip, then sighed. "You need rest, honey. Stress isn't your friend right now. Maybe close your eyes for a bit?" "I can't," Emily murmured. "Every time I close them, I see his face." After the nurse left, Emily picked up her iPhone and scrolled through her photo gallery. There they were pictures from vacations, anniversaries, smiles that now felt like lies. She stopped at a photo from last Christmas, her and Richard in matching sweaters, laughing in front of the tree. Her thumb hovered over the screen before she pressed delete. The image vanished, but the ache stayed. The door opened again. Robert Morgan stepped in, his coat damp from the rain. He carried a small bag of fresh fruit and a worn paperback book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. "I thought this might help," he said gently, setting it on the bedside table. "Your mother used to read it when life felt unfair." Emily reached for the book, her voice breaking. "Dad, I don't know who I am anymore. I built everything for him, for us. Now I'm just empty." Her father sat beside her and took her hand. "You're not empty, Em. You're still here. You're still breathing. That baby inside you, that's your new beginning." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "What if I can't do it alone?" Robert's grip tightened. "Then you won't be alone. I'm here. Michael's here. And someday, when you look back, you'll realize you were stronger than all of this." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe in anything at all. But when night came, and the hospital halls grew silent, the weight of betrayal pressed harder. Her phone buzzed suddenly, a message from an unknown number. "You should stop fighting. He's already moved on." Her hands shook as she read it. No name, no signature, just cruelty disguised as truth. She dropped the phone, her pulse spiking. The monitor beside her beeped faster. Nurses rushed in, voices blurring together. "BP dropping. Get oxygen." Emily gasped for air, clutching her chest. The world turned into flashes of white and echoing noise. Through the haze, she heard her father shouting her name. "Emily, stay with me." Her vision faded into darkness. Then a sudden memory, a younger version of herself standing in the sunlit park, Richard promising, "I'll always protect you." The echo shattered as her consciousness slipped away. Hours later, she woke in the dim light of dawn. A soft beeping filled the air. Her father sat beside her, exhausted but relieved. "You scared the hell out of me," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I was dying," Emily whispered. "You're not," he said firmly. "You're still here, and that means we still have a fight to win." Emily turned her head toward the window. The first rays of sunrise glinted over the skyline, warm against the cold glass. Somewhere deep inside, a spark flickered, a fragile reminder that she wasn't done yet. But as her heart steadied, far across the city, Richard poured champagne into Sophia's glass and laughed, unaware that the woman he'd betrayed had just decided to live. The sound of rain still clung to Manhattan when Richard Harrington sat inside his glass-walled office overlooking Central Park. The skyline glittered with the illusion of power, exactly the way he liked it. His Mont Blanc pen tapped against a thick folder marked private transfer agreements. He didn't hesitate. He never did. With one swift motion, he signed his name across 3 documents, each more ruthless than the last. The first transferred 20% of his company's shares to Sophia Reyes. The second authorized a new bank account in her name, seeded with $5 million. The third, a quiet clause, designated Sophia as the legal beneficiary to his private trust, should anything happen to him. He leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly. "It's not about love," he said to himself. "It's about control." Sophia entered moments later, her heels echoing across the marble floor. She wore a black dress, sleek and sharp, her red lipstick matching the folder she carried. "You called?" Richard stood, walking over to pour 2 glasses of Macallan whiskey. "It's done. You're officially part of my world now." She accepted the glass, eyes glinting. "Finally, though I thought I was already part of your world, Richard." He smirked. "You are, but now it's legal." Sophia sipped slowly, watching him. "And your wife?" "She'll notice when her name disappears from everything." Richard shrugged. "She's in a hospital bed. She'll have other things to worry about." The cruelty in his tone made Sophia pause, though only for a second. "You really are colder than I thought." "That's why I win," he replied. Meanwhile, across town, Michael sat in his dimly lit office, scanning the corporate filings that had just hit the system. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion creeping in. "Unbelievable," he muttered. The transactions were time-stamped at noon just hours earlier. Richard had moved fast. Too fast. He called Robert immediately. "He's transferring everything. Property, stocks, accounts, all to Sophia. If we don't stop this, Emily will lose everything." Robert's voice trembled with rage. "Can we freeze the assets?" "Not yet. I need more evidence. But I'll get it." Back at Mount Sinai, Emily sat by the window, a soft blanket over her shoulders. She held the book her father had brought her, though she hadn't read a single page. Her mind wandered, haunted by whispers of betrayal and half-remembered promises. Her phone buzzed. A message from Michael. "I found something. Rest tonight, we'll talk tomorrow." She didn't reply. Instead, she opened the photo gallery again. There he was, Richard, smiling beside Sophia, champagne raised high. She studied his face, the one she used to trace with her fingertips every morning. Now all she saw was deceit. Tears burned her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. "No more crying," she whispered to herself. "He doesn't get my tears anymore." That night, Richard and Sophia dined at the River Cafe, overlooking the Brooklyn Bridge. Candles flickered between them, reflecting in the glass like twin flames. "To new beginnings," Sophia toasted. "To power," Richard corrected. They laughed quietly. To anyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple, glamorous, untouchable. But power always leaves fingerprints. When Richard left the restaurant, a man in a black coat snapped a few photos from across the street. The flash was faint, but it was enough. Michael's contact had delivered again. By midnight, Michael had the images on his phone. Richard handing Sophia the signed documents, their glasses raised in triumph. "Proof. Real proof." He sent them to Robert with one line, "We've got him." The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of rain again, her body weaker, but her eyes sharper than before. She looked at her reflection in the hospital mirror, a woman broken, but not destroyed. "Whatever you've done, Richard," she whispered, You'll face me soon." And as she spoke, across the city, the empire Richard thought was untouchable began to tremble beneath the weight of his own signature. Morning sunlight crept across the marble floors of the Harrington penthouse. Sophia Reyes stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, her silk robe slipping off one shoulder, the city sparkling beneath her feet. She held her iPhone up, snapping a mirror selfie with the caption, "When success feels like destiny." Within minutes, the photo went viral. Every gossip blog, every social feed lit up with speculation. In the hospital, Emily Morgan scrolled through her phone, each picture cutting deeper. There was Richard, shirt collar open, hand on Sophia's waist. Another shot showed Sophia wearing Emily's diamond bracelet, the one Richard had once said symbolized eternity. Comments flooded the post. "They look perfect together." Finally, the power couple New York deserves. Emily's stomach tightened. The monitor beside her beeped faster. Nurse Kelly hurried over. "Mrs. Harrington, you need to stay calm." Emily turned her face to the wall. "How can I stay calm when the whole world is laughing at me?" Across the city, Richard and Sophia were celebrating at the Plaza Hotel. Champagne sparkled in tall glasses, laughter filling the private suite. A photographer from a luxury magazine snapped pictures while they pretended not to notice. Sophia leaned into Richard and whispered, "She knows now. Everyone does." Richard smirked. "Good. Let her understand the price of weakness." But beneath the arrogance, his eyes flickered with something else, fear. He had noticed the subtle changes around him, fewer friendly phone calls, colder greetings from investors. Scandal, even dressed in diamonds, still smelled like smoke. Meanwhile, Michael Lee sat in his office, analyzing Sophia's social media posts. Each image, each location tag, gave him more evidence. He called Emily that afternoon. "Emily, listen," he said gently. "You don't have to fight this alone. I've got proof, financial transfers, signed documents, photos. We can expose him legally." She hesitated. "If we go public, it'll destroy him." "Emily," Michael replied firmly, "he already destroyed you." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, city lights flickering against her pale face. Her father had gone home to rest, but his words echoed in her mind. "You're stronger than you think." Slowly, she opened her laptop. Her trembling fingers typed a short message and attached the screenshots Michael had sent her. With one click, she sent the email to a trusted journalist she knew from her marketing days. The subject line read, "The Real Richard Harrington." By morning, chaos erupted. News outlets exploded with headlines. "Billionaire Richard Harrington's secret mistress. Exposed funds. Misused for personal gain." Photos from the gala and Sophia's private account were splashed across every screen. Richard's company stock dropped 8% within hours. At the hospital, Emily watched the television in silence. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just exhaled, long and slow, as if releasing years of silence. Sophia stormed into Richard's office, phone in hand. "You promised this would never go public," she hissed. Richard slammed his fist on the desk. "Shut up, Sophia. Do you have any idea what this costs me?" "Costs you?" she shouted. "I'm the one being called a homewrecker." Their argument echoed through the glass walls. Outside, employees pretended not to listen. Hours later, Sophia went live on social media, tears glistening under perfect lighting. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she said, voice trembling. "Love just happens." It was a performance, and the public wasn't buying it. Back at Mount Sinai, Emily's phone buzzed nonstop with messages of support. Strangers called her brave, strong, graceful. But none of that mattered. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror beside her bed. "It's not about revenge," she whispered. "It's about truth." Her father arrived that evening, holding a bouquet of lilies. "You did it, Em," he said softly. "You faced him." She nodded. "Not yet, Dad. The world knows, but he hasn't seen me yet." And as the city buzzed with scandal, Emily closed her eyes and made a promise. The next time Richard saw her, she would no longer be the broken woman he left behind. The morning after the scandal broke, the world of Richard Harrington began to fracture. Board members stopped answering his calls. Investors demanded explanations. His empire, once flawless, was now drowning in headlines and accusations. Yet in his penthouse, Richard stood before the mirror, fixing his tie, convincing himself that power could still silence the truth. Across town, in a quiet brownstone office in Soho, Michael Lee laid out folders, photos, and financial records across a long oak table. The blinds were drawn, the air thick with tension. Emily sat at the end of the table, her face pale but her eyes clear. She was no longer the trembling wife in a hospital bed. She was steady, deliberate, and frighteningly calm. Michael pointed at a document. "This is our leverage." He transferred company funds into Sophia's fake consulting firm. "That's embezzlement. If we present this to the board, they'll have to act." Emily leaned forward. "And what about his reputation?" Michael smirked. "Once this goes public, he'll lose everything that defines him. You don't need to fight with emotion anymore. You just let the truth burn him." Her father, Robert, stood by the window, silent. Finally, he spoke. "When a man like Richard falls, he doesn't fall quietly. Make sure you're ready for what comes next, Em." "I am," she said softly. "I've already lost everything once. I'm not afraid anymore." That afternoon, Michael made a discreet call to a contact at Harrington Properties. "We're holding a board meeting tomorrow morning. Tell them it's mandatory," he said. Then he turned to Emily. "It's time for you to face him." At that, her breath caught for just a second. The thought of seeing Richard again, the man who once promised forever, made her stomach twist. But then she remembered the photos, the lies, the hospital nights alone. Her fear melted into resolve. "Let him see what he destroyed," she said. That night, Emily returned home for the first time in months. The apartment was exactly as she left it, except colder. Dust had gathered on the glass dining table. A half-empty bottle of Richard's favorite whiskey sat on the counter. The faint scent of Sophia's perfume still clung to the air. She walked through each room, touching the memories that no longer belonged to her. The wedding photo, the framed vacation pictures, the luxury watch box she once gifted him. One by one, she removed them all, leaving only emptiness behind. Then, standing before the mirror, she whispered to her reflection, "You've survived worse than this." Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Michael. "Board meeting, 10 a.m. Park Avenue. Be there." She glanced around the apartment one last time, then opened her closet. Her hand paused on a tailored Dior suit, a gift from her father when she first became director at her startup. She smiled faintly. Perfect. Meanwhile, at Richard's penthouse, chaos reigned. Sophia paced the room, shouting, "They're destroying you online. You need to fix this." Richard poured himself a drink. "I built this empire from nothing. No scandal will bring me down." Sophia glared at him. "You're delusional. They're calling you a thief, a liar. Investors are backing out." He turned to her, cold and dismissive. "Maybe it's time you stopped talking and started packing." Her jaw dropped. "You can't just throw me away." "I already did," he said. She stormed out, slamming the door. Richard leaned back, closing his eyes, but even silence couldn't drown the truth anymore. At dawn, Michael stood outside the glass towers of Harrington Properties, a folder tucked under his arm. Emily arrived moments later, stepping out of a black Mercedes her father had arranged. She wore the Dior suit, her hair tied back, her expression calm but fierce. "Ready?" Michael asked. She looked up at the towering building where her life had begun to unravel. "Ready." And as the elevator doors closed behind her, Emily Morgan prepared to confront the man who had once broken her, this time not as his wife, but as his reckoning. The elevator doors slid open onto the 47th floor of Harrington Properties, revealing the polished marble lobby that once felt like home to Emily Morgan. Now, every gleaming surface reflected a world she no longer recognized. Her heels clicked softly as she stepped out, her Dior suit perfectly tailored, her face calm but unreadable. It had been months since she'd last been here, months since the woman who loved Richard died, and someone new began to take her place. Michael Lee followed close behind, carrying a leather portfolio. "Remember," he murmured, "you don't need to argue. The truth will speak for you." Emily nodded, her hands folded tightly. He's going to see me standing. Inside the boardroom, the city stretched endlessly through floor-to-ceiling windows. The room buzzed with tension, executives whispering, phones vibrating, assistants pretending not to eavesdrop. At the head of the table sat Richard Harrington, still immaculate in his black Armani suit. But his confidence had cracks now, tiny fractures in the armor of a man who'd lost control. When Emily entered, silence rippled through the room. Richard looked up, eyes widening. For a moment, he didn't breathe. "Emily?" She smiled faintly. "You look surprised to see me." "You shouldn't be." He rose slowly, voice low. "You shouldn't be here. This is business." "Exactly," she said, taking a seat opposite him. "And you made it personal." Michael placed the portfolio on the table and opened it, spreading documents and printed emails. "Mr. Harrington," he began, his tone professional but sharp. "We have records showing the misappropriation of foundation funds to a shell company, Reyes Consulting LLC. That's fraud under state law." One of the board members leaned forward, frowning. "Is this true, Richard?" Richard straightened his tie, his tone clipped. "This is a misunderstanding. A smear campaign by someone with a grudge." Emily met his eyes. "You mean your wife?" The room fell completely still. Michael continued, sliding another paper forward. "We also have signed transfer documents, company shares, offshore accounts, even personal assets, all redirected to Miss Reyes." "Care to explain that?" Richard's jaw tightened. "This meeting is over." But Robert Morgan entered just then, his presence filling the doorway. The room shifted immediately. Even the executives straightened. "No," he said firmly, "this meeting is just beginning." Richard's composure cracked. "You have no authority here." Robert's voice was cold steel. "You humiliated my daughter while she was fighting for her life. You think money makes you untouchable. You forgot money leaves trails." He tossed a flash drive on the table. Michael plugged it in. The large monitor flickered to life, playing footage from the River Cafe. Richard and Sophia clinking glasses, exchanging signed papers. Gasps filled the room. Emily sat still, her face serene, watching the truth unravel like a film she no longer starred in. Richard's voice trembled. "You invaded my privacy." "No," Emily replied softly. "You invaded my soul." The chairman of the board spoke up, voice grave. "Mr. Harrington, these are serious violations. We'll be calling an emergency vote of removal." Richard looked around the table. Faces that once praised him now avoided his eyes. "You're all cowards," he spat. Emily rose, adjusting her blazer. "No, Richard, they're just finally seeing you clearly." She gathered her papers, turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Do you remember what you said the night we married? You promised I'd never stand alone. Turns out you were right. I'm standing with the truth." As she and Michael exited the boardroom, the whispers began soft at first, then louder. Outside, the winter sun broke through the clouds, casting warm light through the tall glass panes. Michael glanced at her. "You handled that perfectly." Emily exhaled, her eyes glistening. "I didn't do it for revenge. I did it to breathe again." And as the city gleamed around her, Emily realized she wasn't the broken woman who once begged for love. She was the storm that came after. The next morning, Manhattan glowed under a pale winter Sunday. The storm had passed, leaving the city clean and cold, the streets glimmering like polished glass. In her apartment on the Upper East Side, one her father had quietly purchased under her name, Emily Morgan stood before the mirror for the first time in months, without fear in her eyes. The woman staring back at her wasn't the fragile wife who once begged for love. This woman carried quiet fire beneath her calm. Her hair, now neatly cut to shoulder length, framed a face that no longer looked broken. She reached for the black Dior suit hanging on the door, smoothing the fabric with steady hands. The crisp collar brushed against her neck like armor. On the vanity lay a Cartier watch, her mother's, passed down years ago. Emily fastened it around her wrist, the tick-tick echoing like a heartbeat. She glanced at her reflection once more, whispering, "Time to stop surviving. Time to start living." Her father entered the room carrying a folder. "Morning, sweetheart," he said softly. "You look like your mother did the day she walked out of the courtroom with her head high." Emily smiled faintly. "Then I'm on the right path. Robert handed her the folder. Inside was paperwork transferring partial ownership of his company to her name. You're officially on the board, Em. The Morgans don't hide in anyone's shadow. She hugged him tightly. Thank you, Dad, for believing in me when I didn't. Belief is easy when it's the truth, he said, kissing her forehead. A knock sounded at the door. Michael stepped in, holding 2 cups of Starbucks coffee. Fuel for victory, he said with a grin. Emily laughed quietly. You always know when I need caffeine more than courage. He handed her 1 cup and opened his laptop on the dining table. We've got the press conference at noon. The story's out of Richard's control now. Your statement will close the narrative. After today, no one will ever see you as his victim again. Emily took a slow sip of coffee, the warmth grounding her. I'm not going to attack him. I'll just tell the truth, what betrayal does to a woman, and what strength can rebuild. Michael nodded, studying her. You know, I've seen hundreds of cases, but none like this. You didn't just expose a scandal, Emily. You forced an entire industry to face what it protects. She smiled softly. That was never my plan, but maybe it needed to happen. An hour later, Emily stood backstage at a conference room in the Ritz-Carlton, the same place where Richard once humiliated her in absence. Now, the banners read, Morgan Initiative, Building Integrity in Business. Cameras lined the aisles. Reporters murmured, waiting. As she stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Flashbulbs popped. The woman who once lay in a hospital bed now commanded a crowd of CEOs, journalists, and investors. Good afternoon, she began, her voice steady. Many of you know my name because of recent headlines. I was the wife of Richard Harrington. But that's not who I am anymore. I'm a mother, a businesswoman, and a survivor of deceit, both personal and professional. Her tone softened. What I've learned is simple. Silence protects the powerful, but truth heals the broken. Today isn't about revenge, it's about rebuilding trust. Not just in companies, but in ourselves. Applause rose, soft at first, then stronger. Michael smiled from the front row, pride shining in his eyes. After the event, reporters flooded her with questions, but Emily only said one last thing before stepping into her Mercedes. The past doesn't define me. It taught me how to rise. As the car pulled away, the city shimmered around her. She glanced at her Cartier watch, then at the skyline glowing under the midday light. And for the first time, Emily Morgan didn't feel like she was walking away from her past. She was walking into the woman she was always meant to be. The morning after the press conference, headlines blazed across every business outlet. Emily Morgan reclaims power, the woman who spoke against corruption. Television anchors debated her courage, newspapers ran full-page spreads, and social media hailed her as a symbol of resilience. The world had finally stopped calling her the billionaire's wife. She had become something far more dangerous, an independent woman with truth on her side. At Harrington Properties, the atmosphere was poison. Employees whispered in hallways, glancing nervously whenever Richard's name came up. His private elevator stood unused. His office door remained closed. Rumors of his removal circled like vultures. Inside the boardroom, the tension could have been cut with a knife. Michael Lee stood at the head of the long glass table, flipping through documents. Emily sat beside him, her expression unreadable. She wore a white power suit that gleamed under the ceiling lights, a symbol of calm authority. Her father, Robert, sat across from her, silent but ready. The board members filed in, their faces tight with anxiety. Then came the sound of polished shoes. Richard Harrington entered. His once pristine suit was rumpled, his tie loosened. The man who once commanded rooms with charm now looked cornered. "Emily," he said, voice low, "this isn't necessary." She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. "It's long overdue." Michael placed a file before the board. "We'll begin with the findings," he said. "Misuse of funds, falsified statements, and ethical violations tied to both personal and professional misconduct." One of the senior members, a stern woman in her 60s, adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Harrington, these documents show you transferred millions to accounts linked with Miss Ray's. Do you deny this?" Richard's jaw tightened. "Those were legitimate business expenses." Emily leaned forward. "You mean the penthouse in Los Angeles? The jewelry? The vacations? Was that business too?" He glared at her. "You don't know what it takes to run an empire, Emily." Her voice stayed calm. "No, Richard. You don't know what it takes to build one without destroying people along the way." A murmur spread across the table. Michael clicked a remote, and the screen behind them lit up photos, bank transfers, internal emails. The evidence was undeniable. Richard turned toward the board, desperation creeping into his tone. "This is a setup. She's using my mistakes to humiliate me." Robert's voice thundered across the room. "No, son. You humiliated yourself the moment you chose greed over love." Silence followed. The chairman cleared his throat. "We've seen enough. A vote will be held." Hands rose, one by one, until every member except Richard's own assistant voted for removal. The chairman announced the decision. Effective immediately, Richard Harrington is dismissed as CEO of Harrington Properties. Control will transfer to the interim board until further notice. Richard stood motionless, his world collapsing. He turned to Emily, eyes burning with rage and disbelief. "You think this makes you powerful?" She stood slowly, facing him across the table. "No, Richard. This makes me free." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. For the first time, Richard Harrington had nothing left to say. Emily gathered her papers and turned toward the exit. As she reached the door, she paused. "For what it's worth," she said softly. "I hope someday you understand what love really means before it's too late." Outside, the air was crisp and bright. Reporters waited near the steps, shouting her name, but Emily didn't stop. Michael followed beside her, saying quietly, "It's over." She smiled faintly. "No, Michael, it's just beginning." They walked toward the waiting black Mercedes, the morning sun reflecting off the mirrored towers above them. And somewhere high in those towers, the ghost of Richard's empire began to crumble, while Emily Morgan stepped into the world as a woman who no longer needed saving. That evening, New York glowed beneath a velvet sky, but the glitter of the city could not outshine the chaos unfolding behind its glass towers. In the span of 24 hours, Richard Harrington had gone from a man of influence to a man of disgrace. His name trended on every platform, but for all the wrong reasons: fraud, infidelity, collapse. Inside a television studio overlooking Times Square, cameras and lights filled the room where Emily Morgan prepared for her first live interview. The host, Diane Rivers, a respected journalist known for her calm yet piercing tone, sat across from her. "Are you ready?" Diane asked. Emily adjusted the small mic, clipped to her white blazer. "I've been silent long enough," she said. "It's time people hear the truth, not the rumors." Backstage, Michael Lee watched with folded arms. He had advised caution, but deep down, he knew this was the moment Emily had earned. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming her narrative. The red light blinked. The interview was live. Diane smiled into the camera. "Good evening, New York. Tonight, we have with us Emily Morgan, the woman at the center of one of the most powerful corporate scandals of the decade. Emily, thank you for joining us." "Thank you for having me," she replied, her voice steady. Diane leaned forward slightly. "You've endured betrayal, public humiliation, and the loss of a marriage that was once idolized. Yet you're here, calm, collected. How did you find the strength to face all this?" Emily took a breath. "When you lose everything you thought defined you, your marriage, your reputation, you have two choices: break or rebuild. I chose to rebuild." The audience watching at home fell silent. Diane nodded. "And what do you say to those who claim this is just revenge?" Emily's eyes glinted beneath the studio lights. "Revenge is about destruction. Truth is about clarity. I didn't destroy his empire, he did that the moment he chose deceit over honesty. I simply stopped protecting his lies." As her words echoed, screens across the nation filled with her image, strong, poised, unflinching. The interview went viral before it even ended. Meanwhile, in a dim penthouse miles away, Richard sat alone in the dark, the television flickering blue light across his face. Empty bottles of Macallan littered the table. He watched Emily speak, her voice calm, her presence commanding, and something twisted inside him. "She's turning them all against me," he muttered. But the truth was harsher. She wasn't turning them. They had already turned. Sophia Reyes burst into the room, her expression frantic. "They froze your accounts, Richard. The foundation board just terminated all contracts. We're finished." He slammed his glass down. "Get out, Sophia." Her eyes filled with fury. "You promised me forever. You used me." He stood shouting, "You were never more than a convenience." Sophia's hand trembled, but her voice steadied. "Then enjoy your convenience alone." She walked out, slamming the door behind her. Back at the studio, Diane's final question hung in the air. "Emily, if Richard Harrington were watching this right now, what would you say to him?" Emily's lips parted, her tone soft but resolute. "I'd say thank you. Because of your betrayal, I found myself. Because of your lies, I discovered the truth about love. It begins with respect, and it ends where deceit begins." The audience erupted in applause. After the show, Michael met her outside beneath the glowing billboards of Times Square. "You realize that was broadcast in over 40 countries?" he said, half smiling. Emily laughed quietly. "Then maybe someone somewhere needed to hear it." They walked through the cold night air, neon lights painting their faces in color. Around them, the city pulsed with life, a reminder that even after ruin, there was renewal. And as the last billboard faded behind her, Emily Morgan became not the woman who was betrayed, but the woman who told the world the truth and walked away stronger than ever. The following week, the empire of Richard Harrington began to crumble like a skyscraper built on sand. The boardroom that once echoed with applause now filled with panic. Phones rang non-stop. Lawyers lined the halls. The media camped outside the glass tower, waiting for a statement that would never come. From her office window, Emily Morgan watched the chaos from afar. She sat in the sleek new headquarters of the Morgan Initiative, a nonprofit she'd founded to help women in business recover from corporate abuse and financial manipulation. Her phone buzzed with updates every hour, each one more damning than the last. "Another investor just pulled out," Michael said, stepping into her office with a folder. "That's 6 major backers gone in 2 days. The SEC opened an official investigation this morning." Emily nodded calmly. "Let the truth finish what it started." He studied her face, half expecting to see satisfaction, but there was none. "You really don't want to see him fall, do you?" She looked out the window toward the skyline, her reflection blending with the city. "I don't want to see anyone fall, Michael. I just want peace. But some men only learn after they lose everything they worship." Meanwhile, across town, Richard stood in his office surrounded by silence. The once busy phones were dead, the assistants gone. Boxes lined the floor, remnants of the empire he had ruled for 20 years. He stared at the empty shelves where awards once stood. Outside his window, the city he once commanded seemed colder, more distant. Sophia Reyes had vanished days ago, deleting her social media and fleeing to Los Angeles. His private jet had been grounded, his accounts frozen. Even the Mercedes S-Class that symbolized his power had been repossessed that morning. A knock sounded on the door. His lawyer entered, avoiding eye contact. "Richard, the board finalized the decision. They're liquidating your shares. It's over." Richard laughed bitterly. "Over? I built this city. I made millionaires out of men who couldn't balance a checkbook." The lawyer sighed. "And now those same men are watching you burn." After he left, Richard poured the last of his whiskey into a glass, staring at the amber reflection. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't disguise: fear. The silence pressed down on him like a weight. At that moment, his phone buzzed. An email notification appeared. From Emily Morgan. Subject: Closure. He hesitated before opening it. The message was short. "Richard, I don't hate you. I don't even wish you pain. I simply wish you to understand what love costs when it's taken for granted. I forgave you long before the world judged you. I hope someday you forgive yourself. Emily." He stared at the screen, the words cutting deeper than any scandal ever could. For the first time, tears formed in his eyes, not for losing wealth, but for losing the one thing money could never buy: grace. That night, while Richard packed the last of his belongings into a single suitcase, reporters flooded the streets below. Camera flashes illuminated his once proud name, now etched on headlines of failure. He walked past them without a word. Coat collar turned up, the city lights reflecting off the rain-soaked pavement. Across Manhattan, Emily sat with her father and Michael in her new office, sipping tea from a Tiffany cup. Her father placed a hand on hers. "It's done, sweetheart. He can't hurt you anymore." Emily nodded softly. "He never really could, Dad. He just made me forget who I was." Outside the window, snow began to fall again, blanketing the city that had witnessed both her heartbreak and her rebirth. And as the last of Richard Harrington's empire turned to dust, Emily Morgan realized she hadn't destroyed him, he had destroyed himself, and she had finally learned how to build anew. The morning after Richard Harrington's downfall, headlines shifted toward another name: Sophia Reyes, the other woman behind the empire. For years, she had floated through New York's elite circles with charm and luxury. Now she was drowning in the very world that once adored her. Sophia stood in the lobby of a Beverly Hills hotel, surrounded by suitcases and flashing cameras. Paparazzi shouted questions as she tried to hide behind oversized sunglasses. "Sophia, did you know the funds were illegal? Were you in on the fraud? Is it true Richard left you with nothing?" Her lips trembled as she forced a smile. No comment. When she reached her suite, the silence hit like a slap. The credit cards Richard had once showered her with were frozen. The assistant who booked her flights had vanished. She turned on her MacBook, hoping for some kind of message from him, but her inbox was empty. The screen reflected her tear-streaked face, and for the first time, she saw not the glamorous woman of the tabloids, but a ghost of her own choices. Her phone buzzed, a call from her publicist. "Sophia, we can't manage the damage anymore. Brands are cutting ties. You've lost every endorsement. You should lay low for a while." "How long?" she whispered. "Maybe forever," the voice said before hanging up. Across the country, Emily Morgan sat in her office at the Morgan Initiative, reviewing proposals for a new mentorship program. When Michael entered, holding a newspaper, his expression was grim. "She's collapsing fast," he said. "Paparazzi caught her trying to leave the country this morning. It's all over the news." Emily paused, setting her pen down. "I don't take joy in that," she said quietly. Michael studied her. "You're a better person than she ever was." "No," Emily replied, eyes distant. "Just luckier to have people who reminded me who I am." That evening, Sophia sat alone on the balcony of her hotel suite, looking out over the Los Angeles skyline. The city lights glittered like stars, mocking her fall. She poured herself a glass of wine, her hand trembling. On the coffee table lay a pile of unopened letters from Richard. None of them contained the apology she once dreamed of. A knock came at the door. She hesitated, then opened it. A bellhop stood there, holding an envelope. "Miss Reyes, this just arrived for you." She took it, closing the door behind her. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no signature, just 3 words written in Richard's familiar handwriting. "It's your turn." Her knees buckled. The glass slipped from her hand, shattering across the marble floor. The next morning, news broke that Sophia Reyes had been detained for questioning by the FBI regarding financial transfers and fraudulent accounts. The internet exploded once again. Her name became the face of scandal. At the same moment, Emily watched the broadcast in quiet disbelief. "She's going to prison," Michael said softly. Emily shook her head. She was already imprisoned by her choices. Later that night, Emily drove to the Brooklyn Bridge, parking near the River Cafe, the place where it all began. The city lights shimmered on the water. She leaned on the railing, the winter air biting her cheeks. For the first time, she didn't think about Richard or Sophia. She thought about her baby, the tiny heartbeat that had survived every storm. She placed a hand over her stomach and whispered, "We made it." The phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A message from Michael. "The past is closing its chapter. Are you ready for the next one?" Emily smiled faintly, typing back, "Yes, it's time." And as Sophia Reyes faced the same flashbulbs that once crowned her, Emily Morgan stood beneath the same city lights that once witnessed her pain, now free, untouched, and unafraid of whatever came next. 3 months passed. Winter melted into a gentler spring, and the city that had once been Emily Morgan's battlefield began to soften. The Morgan Initiative flourished. Her story had inspired thousands of women across the country. And yet, when the applause faded each night, a quiet ache still lingered, a hollow space where love used to live. One afternoon, after giving a speech at Columbia University, Emily felt faint. The rush of applause blurred into a dull echo. Michael, ever protective, insisted she visit her doctor, but she brushed it off until her father intervened. "You're not invincible, Em. Go get checked." That's how she met Dr. Jason Mitchell. He was tall, in his late 30s, with kind eyes that didn't judge and a calm voice that carried no pity. When she entered his office at Mount Sinai, he glanced up from her file with a gentle smile. "Mrs. Morgan." "Just Emily," she corrected, sitting down. "Mrs. Morgan feels outdated." He chuckled softly. "Fair enough. You've been through a lot. Stress like that leaves marks, even when we think it's over." "I'm fine," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. Jason leaned back in his chair. "You've said that before, haven't you?" His words hit deeper than she expected. For a moment, she couldn't answer. Then, quietly, she admitted, "Too many times." Over the next few weeks, she returned for follow-ups. Their conversations drifted from medical questions to life itself, books, music, the small moments that heal when grand victories can't. One afternoon, he handed her a coffee from Starbucks and smiled. "You strike me as someone who drinks too much tea." She laughed. Guilty. They sat by the window overlooking Central Park, the trees blooming pale pink. Jason spoke about volunteering abroad, helping women in rural clinics rebuild after trauma. "People think medicine is about curing," he said, "but most of the time it's just about staying, showing up." Emily looked at him, realizing how long it had been since someone simply stayed. Weeks turned into months. Their friendship deepened, quiet dinners, walks through the park, late-night talks about forgiveness. Jason never asked about Richard. He didn't need to. His silence said, "I see you beyond the pain." One evening, after a charity gala for her foundation, Emily found herself standing with Jason on the terrace of the Plaza Hotel. The Manhattan skyline glittered before them, the same view that once symbolized her heartbreak. But tonight, it felt different, peaceful, almost tender. "You've rebuilt something extraordinary," Jason said, his voice low. "Not just your life, but something bigger for others." She smiled, the wind brushing her hair. "I didn't plan it. I just didn't want anyone else to feel invisible." He looked at her then, really looked, his gaze steady and warm. "You're far from invisible, Emily. You're the bravest person I've met." Her breath caught, her heart fluttering with something she hadn't felt in years, safety. The night grew quiet between them, the city humming below like a heartbeat. Then Jason reached for her hand. It wasn't a grand gesture, just gentle, honest. She didn't pull away. "Maybe," he said softly, "it's time you let someone show up for you." For the first time, she didn't argue. She just smiled, tears glistening at the edge of her lashes. "Maybe it is." They stood in silence, the lights of Manhattan shimmering around them. The pain of the past still existed, but it no longer defined her. It had shaped her into someone stronger, someone ready. And as Jason's hand rested in hers beneath the glow of the city, Emily Morgan realized that love, when it finally returns, doesn't arrive to rescue it, arrives to remind you that you were never lost. Spring deepened into summer, and for the first time in years, Emily Morgan's days carried peace instead of pressure. The city that once felt cruel now seemed alive again, the hum of Manhattan streets, the laughter from cafe patios, the warmth of sunlight streaming through her apartment windows. She was no longer surviving the world, she was part of it again. One Saturday morning, she met Dr. Jason Mitchell at a small coffee shop near Central Park. The place smelled of roasted beans and vanilla, the kind of warmth that lingered longer than words. He was already there, seated by the window with 2 cups waiting. Black coffee, Extra shot, he said as she sat down. You've been working too hard again. Emily smiled. You sound like my father. Then your father's a smart man, he replied with a grin. They talked for hours about life, work, simple things. No headlines, no drama, just quiet connection. Jason told her stories about his medical trips abroad, and Emily listened with genuine wonder. You've seen so much pain, she said softly. How do you not carry it? He looked at her gently. You don't escape pain, Emily. You learn to walk with it until it becomes part of your strength. His words stayed with her. That afternoon, she invited him to her foundation's new community center in Brooklyn. It was a renovated brownstone filled with women rebuilding their lives, artists, entrepreneurs, single mothers. As Emily walked him through the rooms, Jason noticed how people's faces lit up when they saw her. You built this from nothing, he said quietly. She shook her head. I built it from everything that broke me. Later, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, they stood on the rooftop terrace overlooking the East River. The wind carried the scent of fresh rain. Jason turned to her. You know, he said, you've changed since the first time I met you. There's light in you again. Emily laughed softly. I didn't know I'd lost it until someone reminded me it was still there. He smiled, understanding without needing to ask who that someone was. Over the next weeks, their friendship deepened into something unspoken but undeniable. They spent evenings walking through Central Park, grabbing takeout from small diners, sitting by the river in comfortable silence. Jason never pushed, never demanded. He simply stayed steady and kind, the way storms give way to calm seas. One night, after a long day at the foundation, Emily found herself back in his office for a routine checkup. He looked over her file and said, Everything looks good. You're healthier than I've ever seen you. She smiled. That's because, for once, I'm not fighting anymore. As she got up to leave, he hesitated, then said, Emily, may I ask you something not doctor-related? She turned, curious. Of course. Do you ever think about letting someone in again? Not out of need, but choice. The question hung in the air like a challenge and a comfort all at once. Emily looked down at her hands, then back at him. I used to think love meant losing yourself in someone. Now I know it means being seen and still standing whole. So yes, maybe I'm ready. Jason's smile was soft but certain. Then I hope I'm lucky enough to be the one who gets to stand beside you. Her heart skipped. You already are, Jason. Outside the hospital, the evening lights shimmered against the glass towers, and for the first time in years, Emily didn't feel like she was leaving something behind. She felt like she was coming home, and as she walked into the night beside the man who never tried to fix her, Emily Morgan realized that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning to love again without fear. Summer ripened over Manhattan, painting the skyline gold each evening. By now, Emily Morgan had reclaimed every piece of herself. Her name no longer followed headlines of heartbreak, but appeared in business journals, philanthropy articles, and university lectures. The Morgan Initiative had become a nationwide movement. Women called her the voice of resilience. But Emily didn't see herself as a hero, just someone who survived and decided to build something out of the wreckage. That morning, she sat at her glass desk overlooking Fifth Avenue, the hum of the city drifting through the open window. Her MacBook Pro glowed with emails, invitations to conferences, partnership proposals, speaking requests. She took a deep breath, scanning them briefly before opening a message marked urgent from Columbia University. Emily, it read, we'd like to offer you a position as guest lecturer for the fall semester, Leadership After Loss. Your story has transformed thousands. We believe your lessons belong in our classrooms. She leaned back, blinking at the screen. A quiet smile spread across her face. It wasn't about prestige. It was about coming full circle. Once, she'd fought to prove herself in a man's world. Now, she was teaching others how to thrive in their own. Her phone buzzed. Jason's name appeared. Morning, Professor Morgan. His warm voice teased. She laughed. You heard already? I might have a few connections at Columbia, he said. I also happen to know someone who deserves every bit of that recognition. You're biased, she said, smiling. Completely, he replied. He paused, then added, "Dinner tonight? I've got reservations at the River Cafe." She hesitated for only a moment, remembering that same place once tied to betrayal. Then she nodded to herself. Yes, let's rewrite that memory. That evening, the air over Brooklyn was soft and sweet, the sunset spilling gold across the river. The restaurant glowed beneath string lights, the Manhattan skyline shining in the distance. As they sat by the window, Jason reached for her hand across the table. "You know," he said gently, "you've spent so long helping others heal. When's the last time you celebrated yourself?" Emily laughed quietly. "Probably never." "Then tonight's for you," he said. "For surviving, rebuilding, and daring to start again." For the first time in years, she allowed herself to relax, to just exist. They talked about everything and nothing, her upcoming lectures, his next medical outreach, the simple joys of ordinary days. When dessert arrived, Jason pulled out a small, neatly wrapped box. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Not what you think," he said, grinning. "Open it." Inside lay a sleek silver pen, engraved with her initials, EMM. She ran her fingers over the metal, her heart tightening. "A Mont Blanc," she whispered. "I figured it was time to replace the one tied to your past," he said softly. "Now you can write new chapters with it." Her throat caught. "You have no idea what this means to me." "Oh, I do," he said. "You gave the world your voice again. You deserve to write your story however you want." As the city lights shimmered on the water, Emily realized how far she had come from the hospital bed, from betrayal, from fear. She wasn't the woman left behind. She was the woman who moved forward. Later that night, back in her apartment, she placed the pen on her desk beside her laptop. She opened a blank document titled Chapter 1. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Trembling not from doubt, but from excitement, she began typing the words that would soon open her first book. This isn't a story about loss. It's a story about rediscovery. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat, and as Emily Morgan wrote beneath the soft glow of the city, she finally understood the true victory wasn't revenge or reputation. It was peace, purpose, and the courage to begin again. Autumn rolled over New York with amber skies and air scented faintly of rain and roasted chestnuts. For Emily Morgan, every season now felt like a quiet reward, a chance to breathe, to live without fear. The baby she once fought to protect was due any day. Her apartment, once cold and hollow, now overflowed with warmth. Tiny clothes folded neatly on the dresser, soft blankets, a crib by the window facing Central Park. On a calm Saturday morning, she sat at the kitchen table with her father, Robert, and Michael Lee. Sunlight streamed through the windows, touching the silver kettle on the stove. "I never thought I'd see you smile like this again," Robert said, pouring tea into her Tiffany cup. Emily smiled, her hand resting gently on her rounded belly. "Me neither, Dad. I didn't think peace could look like this." Michael grinned. "You rebuilt your whole life, Em. From a headline to a legacy." She laughed softly. "And all I wanted was to survive." Just then, the doorbell rang. Jason Mitchell stepped in, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. "For luck," he said, handing them to her, "though I doubt you need any. You seem to create your own now." Emily blushed. "I think I just attract better people these days." He smiled, his gaze tender. "You always did, you just forgot for a while." They spent the morning talking about simple things. Baby names, nursery colors. How quickly life can change when pain turns into purpose. For the first time, Emily wasn't planning her future around fear. She was living it, moment by moment. By afternoon, a gentle rain began to fall. Jason insisted on driving her to her prenatal checkup. The hospital corridors no longer triggered memories of fear, they smelled of hope now. As they walked down the hall, Emily caught sight of her reflection in the glass. Calm eyes, soft strength, a woman reborn. The doctor smiled. "Everything looks perfect, Emily. You're ready." Later, back home, she stood by the nursery window, watching the city shimmer through the drizzle. The skyline glowed like a promise alive, forgiving. Jason came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "You ever think about how far you've come?" he asked. "Every day," she whispered. Sometimes I still can't believe I survived it all. You didn't just survive, he said quietly. You transformed. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her desk, the Mont Blanc pen Jason had given her resting beside her journal. Opening it, she began to write a letter to her unborn child. My little one, you came into my life when I thought everything was ending. But you reminded me that endings are just disguised beginnings. I hope you grow up knowing that strength isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to keep going. I will teach you love, not fear. I will show you how to stand tall, even when the world forgets your worth. Because I did, once, and I found it again. Her tears fell softly onto the page, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. When she finished, she placed the letter in a small silver box beside the crib. Then she turned out the lights and stood for a moment, listening to the city hum beyond the window, the same city that had witnessed her heartbreak, her collapse, and now, her rebirth. Jason entered quietly. Everything okay? She nodded, smiling through tired eyes. Everything's perfect. He took her hand, and together they looked out at the skyline. Below them, Manhattan glittered in the night, unaware that somewhere high above, a woman who had lost everything had finally found everything that mattered. And as thunder rolled gently across the horizon, Emily Morgan felt the first stir of new life inside her and realized the greatest revenge against pain was joy that no one could take away. The first snow of winter drifted softly over Manhattan, blanketing the city in quiet white. In a private maternity suite at Mount Sinai Hospital, Emily Morgan held her newborn daughter in her arms, the baby's tiny fingers wrapped around hers with surprising strength. Tears filled Emily's eyes, not from pain, but from awe. After everything, life had found its way back to her. Her father stood by the window, smiling through tears of his own. She's perfect, he whispered. Just like her mother. Emily looked down at the sleeping child. Her name's Grace, she said softly. Because that's what saved me. Michael entered with a bouquet of pink roses. Congratulations, Professor Morgan, he said warmly. You've officially graduated from survivor to mother. Emily laughed, exhaustion lacing her voice. That's the only title that matters anymore. When Jason walked in, his scrub still on from another delivery, his face lit up the room. How are my favorite two girls? He asked gently. We're both breathing, Emily said, and that's everything. He sat beside her, watching the baby with quiet reverence. You did it, Emily. Every storm you walked through led to this. She smiled faintly. I think maybe the storms were never meant to destroy me, just to wash away what wasn't real. Over the next few days, the hospital room became a sanctuary. Friends, colleagues, and even women she had mentored visited to share in her joy. Reporters requested interviews, but Emily declined them all. This moment wasn't for the world, it was hers. At night, when the lights dimmed and the city glowed beyond the window, she would whisper to her daughter, "You're the proof that love can survive anything." Grace would stir slightly, her small chest rising and falling, the embodiment of new beginnings. One evening, Jason entered quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "You're healing beautifully," he said, sitting beside her. Emily looked at him, the man who had walked into her life when she had stopped believing in love. "You know what the funny thing is?" she said softly. "I thought I'd spend the rest of my life trying to forget what happened. But now, I'm grateful it did. It brought me here." He reached for her hand, brushing his thumb against her ring finger, bare now, yet unburdened. "Some scars don't fade," he said. "But they stop hurting when you finally find peace." She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "I think I've found mine." Weeks later, she returned home with Grace cradled in her arms. The apartment, once filled with silence, now echoed with the soft sounds of lullabies. Her father had installed a wooden cradle by the window, carved with the words, "New Beginnings." As snow fell outside, Emily placed her daughter gently inside the cradle and stood watching her sleep. The world outside shimmered beneath the lights of Fifth Avenue, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt complete. She walked to her desk, opened her laptop, and began typing the final chapter of her book, The Light After the Storm. "To every woman who has been broken," she wrote, You are not your pain. You are what grows after it. Love again, trust again, live again. The world needs your strength more than your silence. When she finished, she placed the Mont Blanc pen, once a symbol of betrayal, beside the laptop. It no longer carried the weight of the past. It was simply a pen again. Jason appeared at the doorway, smiling. "She's asleep already?" Emily turned toward him, her eyes glowing. "She sleeps easily when she knows she's safe." He crossed the room, wrapping his arms around her. Together they stood by the window, watching snowflakes drift against the night sky. The world had not become perfect, but it had become hers again. And as the first dawn of a new year rose over Manhattan, Emily Morgan whispered a final promise to never live in fear again, to raise her daughter in truth, and to love without apology. The storm was over. The light was hers. So, that's how Emily's story ends. But maybe, my friend, you're still here because something in her journey touched a quiet place in your heart too. You know, life has a way of breaking us down just to show us what we're really made of. Emily lost everything: love, trust, safety, and yet she rebuilt herself, piece by piece. And isn't that what healing really is? Not forgetting the pain, but learning to walk with it. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's exactly what Emily did, and it's what you can do too. No matter how dark your night feels, there's always a sunrise waiting for you to meet it. So if you're still watching, take this moment as a reminder. You are not your past, you are your comeback. And somewhere deep down, there's a light in you that no one can extinguish. If this story spoke to you, give it a like, share it with someone who needs hope tonight. And don't forget to subscribe, because here, we tell stories that remind you how powerful the human heart truly is.